Chapter 80, The Temporary Manner. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. TL Note. My dear readers, I have a feeling that the real story is about to begin. Chapter 80. The Temporary Manner. The fiery flood dragon had been flying fast ahead of Ji Hao, with its feet on the fiery cloud. Behind the fiery flood dragon, Ji Hao was standing on the back of a gigantic rock, and controlling the huge bird, while following the fiery flood dragon at about 1,000 feet distance. Behind Ji Hao were hundreds of large scale birds, which were flying in a line. Each of these large birds were carrying a couple of young boys and girls, who were at about the same age as Ji Hao. These boys and girls were the 3,000 young slaves that had been carefully selected from the Fire Crow clansmen. The red cloud was rolling low in the sky. The fierce hurricane had been lashing hard on these boys and girls along with the heavy rain. Those young kids who barely had any power couldn't even keep their eyes open in the wind, and some weak girls were crying in fear. However, the hurricane rolled all of their wailing away after they cried out, making it impossible for leaving any trace of their voices. Not everyone could be as powerful as Ji Hao, who was capable of riding on Mr. Crow's back and had been hanging around in the jungle. Amongst these 3,000 young slaves, no more than a few tens of them had some experience with riding on flying beasts. The rest of them hadn't even tried to go hunting alone in the jungle. They were just a group of kids, who had barely grown up and left their parents' protections. They were put onto the backs of these gigantic birds without any preparation, and were flying fleetingly in the air tens of thousands of feet high from the ground. Added with the ruthlessly blowing of the fierce hurricane and being lashed on by the heavy rain, they already had difficulty with holding themselves onto the backs of the gigantic birds, without being blown away. The fiery flood dragon had flown for quite a long while, before it finally slowed down under the command of the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man turned his head back with a disapproving look on his face, and shouted harshly towards Ji Hao, "Such a group of dirty, stinking barbaric, useless things. Those couple of little girls, stop crying. Is there anything worth to cry for? If you don't stop, you'll all be whipped to death." Then the man pointed his finger at Ji Hao, and harshly yelled, "Kid, you better keep these low-life slaves of yours under control. If they ever make any mistake, no one would be able to save you from a terrible beating. If you're lucky, all of your bones would be broken, and if not, you'll just die for good. How much could your stupid barbarians live be worth?" Ji Hao was totally pissed off by the middle-aged man's words. Wisps of fiery light were even spurting out from his pupils. However, the repeated warnings given by Ji Zhua, Ji Xia, Qin Fu, and even Ji Fang, before he left the cold stream valley, started to flow in his head. Therefore, Ji Hao could only hold his temper back, silently bended his waist, politely saluted towards the middle-aged man and said, "Dear mister, you're absolutely right, I will keep my eyes on them." At that moment, the rock ridden by Ji Hao had finally caught up with the fiery flood dragon. Ji Hao took a human-head-sized leather bag from around his own waist and threw it into the middle-aged man's hands. The man threw a surprised glance at Ji Hao, ripped the leather bag open and looked inside. All of a sudden his cold and mean face had burst into a bright smile, even his tone had become a lot softer than before. The man then said to Ji Hao gently, "Hadn't thought that a little kid like you would be the most reasonable person of your clan. You're much better than those clansmen of yours." My name is Yen, you can just call me Uncle Yen. Don't you worry, I'll look after you from now on." Yen proudly weighed that leather bag in his hand, then satisfied he tied it around his own waist. During the rest of the journey, the fiery flood dragon's flying speed had decreased. Those boys and girls on the gigantic birds' backs could finally suffer less. Although they still couldn't open their eyes while facing the heavy rain, at least they didn't have to worry about being blown away by the fierce hurricane anymore. Ji Hao let a bitter smile out. Inside the leather bag were 50 pieces of highest quality fire essence crystals that were carefully picked out by him from the cold stream valley during all these days. These highest quality fire essence crystals were small in size, each being as big as only an adult thumb. However, the fiery power contained in each of these crystals could compare to a tank-sized, ordinary fire essence crystal. Ing Yen had seemed very unhappy about everything and everyone ever since he had arrived the Cold Stream Valley. He had been especially picky and mean while talking to the Fire Crow clan's people. Ji Hao had been flying behind him so far and hadn't gotten a chance to talk to him. He had finally slowed the fiery flood dragon down and turned back to Ji Hao. Ji Hao had taken this opportunity and handed the 50 top-quality fire essence crystals to him. As expected, Ing Yen turned into a gentle and polite elder from a mean, noble master, within only a moment. Bribery, amongst the entire Fire Crow clan, who could understand things like this? Even Ji Kuei, the master Magus priest, wouldn't think about something as this, murmured Ji Hao in his head. After Ing Yen turned his head back, Ji Hao curved his mouth downwards and silently complained about Ji Xia and Ji Zhuo. They were flying towards the northwest for a whole day and night, without resting for even a minute. They had already flown 20,000 miles away from the Cold Stream Valley. By now, those boys and girls who were lying on those huge birds' backs, were all foaming at the mouths. More seriously, their entire bodies had gone stiff. After they had flown past 3 lofty mountains that lied in a triangle formation, a large, sky-blue lake suddenly appeared before their sights. Ji Hao was sitting on the rock's back and activated the gold crow pupils, clearly saw that, upon the water surface of the thousands of miles wide lake, countless human-head-sized, nearly translucent, breathtakingly beautiful flowers were silently blooming under the heavy rain. These flowers had a similar shape as a lotus, only there were more petals on these flowers than there were on a lotus, causing them to overlap each other. Each flower had at least over 100 petals. Under the heavy rain, the petals of this kind of flower seemed especially elastic. Countless raindrops dripped on those petals and were rebounded, darting towards all directions, like beady and transparent pearls. Above the lake, countless crystal-like water drops had been swishing in the air, which could be seen clearly. This scene was extremely rare and beautiful. Beside the lake stood a cliff that was so high that it even reached into the sky. Someone had opened up a flat area with immeasurable power, and built a great, magnificent palace on the flat area. Ji Hao noticed that sharp stairs were built on the grassland by the lake, directly leading to a wide square in front of the palace gate. Tens of feet wide stairs were built straightly upwards, firmly standing under the great rain. There were 900.90.9 stairs in total between the square in front of the palace and the grassland by the lake. Located on the edge of the square and the end of the stairs, was a heavy, thick and ancient-style arch that was decorated with a line of statues of all kinds of ferocious beasts. The arch was emitting a very strong sense of primitive and vigorous power. Under the 1,000-feet-tall arch, nearly 100 tall and muscular warriors with bronze armors and long bronze spears were guarding in a line. Near the feet of each of these warriors, a strong battle beast had been lying on the ground. Bright light could be seen flashing brightly in the eyes of these warriors, all of them were giving a cold and powerful vibe. Under their feet, fiery clouds were blazing and rolling. All of them had been standing on fiery clouds instead of the ground. Ji Hao carefully looked through these warriors with his spiritual power. What he saw made his mouth fall wide open and exclaim in his head. These warriors, who were guarding the arch, were all elite warriors similar to the 5 strongest warriors amongst his personal slaves. They had already broken half through into the senior level. Flying across the arch and the wide square, Ji Hao saw that outside of the front gate of the palace, which opened up in the cliff, 8 sturdy warriors, who were also wearing bronze armors, were on guard there. All of them were peak-level senior magi. The power that could be felt coming out from their bodies, was even more dense and fierce than that of Ji Xia. 8 fiery flood dragons were lying beside the feet of these 8 warriors. Ji Hao sensed the same strong power coming from the bodies of these fiery flood dragons as from those senior magi. The feeling of such power made him subconsciously tighten his body, even breathing under such power had become difficult. Hurry, hurry. Do not stand there. Come on down. The fiery dragon ridden by Ing Yen slowly descended from the air. Ing Yen then leapt down from the fiery flood dragon's back, slapped his hands hard and started pressing Ji Hao and those young slaves. Stop standing and doing nothing there. You bunch of uneducated kids, come on down. Hurry. Ing Yen then said to Ji Hao anxiously, "Common, we need workers here. This temporary manor hasn't been used for over hundreds of years. Our young master got bored at home recently, and thought of this flower-viewing temporary manor. You should clean this place up as quickly as possible, our young master will be coming to stay for a while." Ji Hao shook his head hopelessly, and started to command those young slaves who had carefully been selected from the Fire Crow clan slaves, to do what Ing Yen had said. Chapter 81, Man, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 81. Man, 2 days had passed. The magnificent and commodious temporary manor had been cleaned up and renovated. All those dirt that had gathered in the tens of years while this temporary manor was left unused, had been cleaned out. 10,000 fire essence crystals had been inlaid on the walls of those different-sized rooms and lobbies. The heat that was being emitted from the fire essence crystals had dispersed the moisture and the cold in the palace. Those young slaves who had been walking fast across the rooms, and being busy with their work, had added a bit of liveliness to this ancient and mysterious temporary manor. The name of the lake, located under the palace, was Blue Jade, and the beautiful flowers that were blooming in the lake were called Jade String. In accordance with the name of the lake, the temporary manor was called Blue Jade Palace. The Blue Jade Palace had been built for people that were called masters by Ing Yen, for the purpose of viewing these jade string flowers. Inside the palace, an especially large terrace had been built right upon the lake. The nearly 1,000-foot wide terrace was completely cast with bronze. Countless totems of magical and legendary animals, such as fiery dragons, phoenixes, fiery horses, and fiery turtles were embossed on the floor of the terrace, with extremely fine craftsmanship. Standing near the edge of the terrace, one could feel the breeze blowing across the face, and see the rain falling from the sky. The downpour of the rain falling onto those translucent petals of the jade sting's blooms could also be viewed from up here. Crystal raindrops were rebounding by the soft yet firm petals and rose back into the air, flying towards all directions, every time the jade like petals were hit by the raindrops, they would emit a silvery tinkling sound. Innumerable, small tinkle sounds merged together, and became a breathtakingly, appealing, natural melody, as if it coming from the heaven, enchanting all those who heard it. The name, Jade String, perfectly suited such magical flowers. The flowers were like the strings of a music instrument that was being played by the nature itself. Ji Hao started to feel that it seemed quite reasonable to build such a temporary manor, only for the purpose of viewing these magical flowers in the lake. Ing Yen had been yelling around, directing a few young slaves that had come from the Fire Crow clan to carefully lift a round, large tripod that was coiled around by 9 dragon sculptures, to the middle of the terrace. Ing Yen checked the directions of the 9 dragons' heads over and over again, then carefully wiped out a slight speck of dust that was on the tooth of one of the dragons with his sleeve, finally letting out a sigh of relief. He then opened the lid of the tripod by himself and waved his hands towards a few girls. Seeing Ing Yen wave his hands, those girls who had changed into red long dresses with their hairs hung down loosely, carried a 3-foot wide, golden tray and walked over. Ing Yen carefully took those blood-red wooden sticks, which were cut into 3-inch wide, 1-foot long and placed on the golden tray orderly, then put them into the large tripod one after another. The whole bunch of 1,000 wooden sticks had been orderly piled up inside the tripod, after which Ing Yen flicked his fingers towards the wooden stick pile. A slight sphere of blue-white flame slowly flew out from between his fingers, lightly falling on those wooden sticks. Followed by a flaming sound, a sphere of silk-thin, blue-white fire shrouded the entire tripod. Afterwards, a dense aroma started to come out of the tripod, slowly spreading to the surrounding areas. The colorless smoke coming from the tripod contained an extremely thick and rich warm power. Ji Hao had been standing near the edge of the terrace and watching the sea of the flower, He carefully took a breath, and suddenly felt a stream of warm power gushed into his lower abdomen. The sense of his bloodline power suddenly became stronger, even his physical strength had been improved by a little bit. Uncle Yen, what kind of treasure is this? Ji Hao was stunned by the power of the smoke, and asked Ing Yen. Ing Yen raised his eyebrows proudly, grinned to Ji Hao and said, well, not really a treasure, just people like you might hardly see it. This is the real fire dragon blood sandalwood. You must water it with the blood of a 10,000-year-old fire dragon to make it sprout, then it could only grow mature near millions of years old volcanic vents. After that, it could only be chopped down and made into incenses after 10,000 years. This kind of incense is capable of nourishing the vital energy in the blood of the human body, making you stronger. Normally, our young master uses only this kind of incense. Ji Hao's mouth fell wide open after listening to Ing Yen. Millions of years old volcanic vents. Of course he knew what those meant. Within the Fire Crow clan's territory, there was one dangerous place like that. That million-year-old volcanic vent was over 1,000 miles wide. The temperature inside the vent was astonishingly high. Even if ordinary senior magi of the Fire clan would go even slightly near that vent, they might be burnt into ashes because of that tremendous heat. A very long time ago, when the Fire Crow clan was still in its golden age, powerful magi like Magus kings and divine magi had often ventured into the volcanic vent and searched for all kinds of rare treasures hidden in it. However, currently, not a single Magus king had appeared in the Fire Crow clan for thousands of years, because of which the clan could only look at the volcanic vent with zealous eyes. This kind of fire dragon blood sandalwood could only grow near millions of years old volcanic vents. Obviously, it must be an extremely precious treasure. Ing Yen carefully put the lid of the tripod back, then turned around looking at Ji Hao seriously, and said, Ji Hao, during these couple of days, I have seen that you're a good kid. Therefore, I have to warn you with kindness, whatever you do, do not offend our young master, otherwise, not only would you fall into a very hard time, but also if our old master ever wanted to look into this, even your entire clan would suffer from great pain. You have to remember that our young master is about the same age as you. If you act extra cautious, there won't be any serious. Before Ing Yen had finished speaking, the ground had suddenly started to shake. From the end of the corridor leading onto the terrace, a 3-foot-thick bronze gate with all kinds of totems of animals' heads embossed on it, fell down along with a thunderous bang. Two sturdy warriors, who had half broken into the senior level and were guarding the corridor, had now hunkered down on the ground and were holding their heads. Their bodies were quivering intensely, like weak birds under a storm, without even daring to make the slightest sound. Ji Hao popped up his eyes, while Ing Yen shouted aloud, Ayaya, my young master, how come you have arrived today? Ayaya, hadn't they said that you would need to travel a day longer? Followed by a heavy sharp sound, a not very tall little girl rushed over with a huge mace carried on her shoulder. The girl was wearing a red, tight armor. She had snow-white skin, bright eyes and shining teeth. Her long hair was casually banded into a ponytail, by 3 golden rings, and laid on her back. 2 narrow dimples would appear on her face when she smiled. The pink, cherry-like mouth of that girl curved aside. She then raised her foot and kicked on one of the warriors, who were hunkered down on the ground. The poor warrior rolled out for a very long distance like a ball. At the same time, the girl yelled, Ah! Old Yen! You're here! What kind of waste have you brought here? Look at the two of them, couldn't even open the door quickly, I had to kick that door open by myself. The girl then shook her head and frowned, shouted to Ing Yen, Old Yen, why does our own temporary manor have this many doors? I have to open and close those doors one by one while walking, and then open and close again. I feel oppressed by it. Except the front gate. Never mind, including the front gate, you now just have to remove them all. I want this place to be clear and broad, then I'll feel much better when I walk around here. The corners of Ing Yang's mouth twitched. He tremblingly said, Young master, this temporary manor is. The young girl showed the whites of her eyes to Ing Yen, then interrupted his speech impatiently, "It belongs to my big brother, doesn't that mean it's mine too? So, this palace is mine now. Old Yen, just tell your people to start working, remove all the doors here." Ednl.co. The girl then swung her hands carelessly and threw the mace carried on her shoulder, which was 80-foot long, 3 times taller than the girl, and an adult lap thick, towards Ji Hao and said, "Oi, toy boy, carry the stick for man. The mace swooshed towards Ji Hao along with a fierce gust of wind. "Young master. Please be careful. Do not smash one more to death." Ing Yen screamed out aloud while his whole face was twitching violently. Ji Hao quivered when he heard Ing Yen. What did he mean by one more? When the mace was about to hit on his head, Ji Hao intuitively thrust his hands out and caught the mace. Suddenly, a horrible power hit against this hand. Ji Hao felt a great pain coming from every single bone of his body, and heard the metal clashing like sound made by his own bones. He used all of his strength to hold the mace tight, while his feet staggered and stepped back quickly. Bong! 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 Every heavy step of Ji Hao made a great, resonant, bell-like sound against the bronze-cast floor. After only taking 3 steps back, the boots Ji Hao was wearing, which were made of the hardest skin parts of a blood crocodile, were stamped into pieces. Chapter 82, Bodyguard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82. Bodyguard. A terrifyingly great weight. Ji Hao staggered back for around 20 big steps, before he finally stabilized his own body. 20.73-inch. Deep footsteps could clearly be seen on the bronze floor, smoke was puffing out from all of those foot imprints. Ji Hao tightly held the long hilt of the mace. Blood vessels all over his body had swelled and showing under his skin. He felt that all his internal organs were being scorched by some great heat. A stream of blood was choked up in his throat, and had nearly spurted out. White smoke could be seen rising from out his head. Every stream of sweat that gushed out of his body, evaporated into steam under influence of such great heat. Along with the sound of a flame, a large piece of fire appeared around Ji Hao's body. Within the flame, his body was nearly translucent, and over 200 of interleaving meridians, which were shining with a fiery light, could be seen looming. Those shining meridians vaguely formed a totem of a 3-legged gold fire crow. Ing Yen looked at Ji Hao with a slight trace of surprise, then took a glance at the shining meridian net inside Ji Hao's body with an unknown, deeper meaning contained within his eyes. Man, the girl who just had carelessly thrown the mace at Ji Hao, popped up her eyes and stared at Ji Hao in a slight panic while yelling, "Did he die? Oi, old Yen. I don't think he's dead, look. He is still standing there, not vomiting blood, nor smashed into a pile of meat. I think he's alive, don't you?" Bong! Ji Hao held the hilt of the mace and dropped it hard onto the ground. Even half of the manor shook when he did that. Letting out a hoarse laughter, a thick taste of blood came out from Ji Hao's throat. He looked at Man, while smiling bitterly, and said, "I'm okay, I have a bit of strength that allowed me not to be smashed to death. This mace is quite heavy." Man let out a great sigh of relief, beat her own chest hard, laughed out aloud and turned to Ing Yen, yelled harshly, "Old Yen. You people always say that I'm too incautious, accidentally hurt or killed many slaves. Look, this time, I didn't kill anyone. It was all because those slaves you had chosen were useless things, not my fault at all." Ing Yen only smiled bitterly, and didn't say anything. Man put her hands behind her own body, leapt up to Ji Hao, raised her head and looked at Ji Hao from head to toe. She frowningly measured the height difference between Ji Hao and herself with her hand, then stood on her tiptoes, and slapped hard on Ji Hao's shoulder. What's your name? You don't look much older than me. You were able to catch my stick, which means that you've got some power in you. From now on, you're following me, and are responsible for carrying my stick." Ji Hao's face suddenly twitched. "What? Follow this little girl around and carry this horrible mace. Shouted Ji Hao in his head. Ji Hao, what are you think about? Just express your gratitude towards the young master. To follow our young master is a wonderful thing that most of your southern wasteland people couldn't even dream of. Ing Yen let out a laughter and said to Ji Hao once Man finished speaking. Ji Hao was speechless for a short while, and remained silent. Ing Yen narrowed his eyes and said with a soft yet cold tone, Ji Hao, to follow our young master will not only bring you endless benefits but will also be good for your Abba, Amma, and even your entire clan. Ji Hao thought of those warnings given by Ji Xia, Ji Zhua, and Ji Fong before he had left the cold stream valley. He clearly knew that the one standing behind this little girl, Man, must be some kind of an incredibly powerful being, which was even more powerful and bigger than the Bai Fong clan. Someone who the Fire Crow clan wouldn't dare to provoke, no matter what. Ing Yen just had clearly said that by following Man, both he and his parents, even his clan, would gain huge benefits. The hidden meaning of his words was even more obvious. If Ji Hao refused to do so, then Ji Xia, Qin Fu and his clan would all be embroiled in some kind of huge trouble. Smiling calmly, Ji Hao leaned the mace against his own chest, raised and cupped both of his hands together, saluted Man and said, since my dear young master, Man, thinks that I, Ji Hao, am qualified to be one of your guards, and doesn't dislike my humble background, and my asininity, then Ji Hao shall follow your order. Man blinked her eyes and laughed out aloud, threw a heavy slap on Ji Hao's chest. The slap, which seemed nothing, was actually as heavy as a mountain. Ji Hao was sent flying backwards along with that mace. The leather armor worn by him suddenly burst into pieces. Luckily, the tight armor made by Put emitted a bright light and blocked the power of Man's slap. Ji Hao thudded against the wall along with the mace. A huge, bronze candlestick was hit by his body and deeply sank into the wall. The violent shock made Ji Hao feel dizzy, stars were flashing in front of his eyes, and he had nearly passed out. Ing Yen gasped widely, and seemed to scream out again. Man opened her mouth as well, while she stared at Ji Hao nervously. After seeing that Ji Hao had started coughing, and was embarrassedly struggling back up from the ground, Man gasped deeply, laughed out, yelled, is your name Ji Hao? You look so thin, and don't even seem to have any muscles, but I never thought that you're so good at taking a beating. Wonderful, I don't have to worry about accidentally getting you killed anymore, you're a lot more useful than those trashes. Ing Yen raised his hand and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, laughed hollowly and said, young master, the old master said that. Man turned back, angrily glared at Ing Yen and said, too many words. Don't, Abba said this, Abba said that, to me all day. My ears even gained callous by hearing these. Is this the jade string flower that my big brother talked about? So interesting. Man then leapt high towards the lake, just like a flea. She landed on the edge of the terrace which was built right on the lake. She had jumped too high and hadn't controlled her own body well, because of which she hit against the bronze guard bar that was decorated with jade. Along with a thunderous bang, the over 100 feet long guard bar was hit into pieces, and countless bronze fragments darted into the air like bullets, flying towards the lake along with ear-piercing swishing sounds. Those bronze fragments of the bar darted into the lake, sent up huge waves, and smashed those soft petals of the jade string blooms. After the surface of the lake had calmed down, in the middle of the originally splendid, starry sky like sea of blooms, an extremely ugly hole could now be seen, and large amounts of broken leaves and branches were floating on the water surface. Soon after that, a large pool of blood started rolling up onto the surface of the water. Within the blood-water mix, hundreds of poor smashed fishes were floating up with their white bellies towards the sky. To see that many dead fishes silently float between the beautiful sea of flowers, seemed very weird no matter from which angle you would look at it. Ing Yen couldn't even bear to look at the lake. He buried his face in his own palms, while letting a moaning sound out from his throat, like a hurt puppy. Man, who had just hit against the guard bar, nearly fell into the lake. She pressed hard on the ground, leaving a deep pit on the bronze floor of the terrace, after which she finally steadied herself. She thrust her head out of the terrace, took a stunned glance at the broken flower cluster in the cloud-like blood. Water, which were still rolling under the surface of the lake, abruptly let an embarrassed laughter out and said, "Ing Yen, you should handle this, come on, clean this up, or I'll beat every single of your grandsons when I get back." "Yes, yes, yes, young master, yes." Ing Yen looked at Man with a tearing face but had no tears, while continuously saying, "Yes." Man made a serious face, and with her hands clasped behind her body, walked out of the terrace. From time to time, she turned her head back and looked at the surface of the lake, which had dead fishes continuously floating up, and laughed embarrassedly. After having taken a few steps further, Man seemed to have thought of Ji Hao. She turned towards Ji Hao, waved her hand, and said, "Ji Hao, right. Get my stick and follow me." Ji Hao helplessly took a deep breath, spent quite an effort to lift the strangely heavy mace up, and caught up with Man, while stepping heavily. "Oi, Ji Hao, are you caught by Ing Yen and sent here to clean this house?" "I know that. Old Yen and a few others, they always like giving orders and using people, for whatever they want. So, your home should be nearby, isn't it? Do you know anywhere that is interesting around here? Why don't you take me there to have a look? Come on." This time, I finally got to get out with my guards, and have some fun while my Abba isn't home. I must have enough fun before I go back. Walking in a dark corridor, Man was murmuring to herself, while Ji Hao was carrying the mace with a twisted face, and ceaselessly shaking his head. TL note. Really like Man. But can't help to think that maybe Ji Hao should eat her, and have her strength. Editor note. My dear TLR wants to introduce cannibalism into this already ancient sacrifice-filled novel Sigh. Chapter 83, Strength. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83. Strength. Ji Hao had already become Man's bodyguard, who was responsible for carrying her mace for 3 days. During these 3 days, Ji Hao got to know about the true Man. She is a really special girl. Ji Hao carried the terribly heavy mace, while looking at Man stunned. At the moment, Man was leaping around in the jungle like a monkey. Her originally snow-white face was now covered in a thick layer of moss, which nobody knew the origin of. The black, shining and perfectly banded ponytail behind her head had become like a sphere of interleaving straws, added with a few small branches that hung on her head. The exquisite and luxury armor was now worn by her shapelessly and twistedly, all stained by mud. After a while Man was gasping heavily, while sitting on a branch. She opened her mouth wide, and took a few fist-sized bird eggs out from a large nest. After that she laughed loud out, waving towards Ji Hao, who had been standing on the ground. "Ji Hao. Look. Bird eggs. Still warm. Do you want one?" After Ji Hao had shaken his head, Man happily cracked one bird egg hard open against her own forehead, then ripped the eggshell open, and poured the clear liquid contained in the egg into her mouth, swallowing it instantly. "So delicious. You sure you don't want one?" Man popped up her eyes, staring at Ji Hao innocently while asking. Her purely black pupils were as clear as water. "I prefer to eat boiled eggs." Ji Hao spread his hands and smiled bitterly. "Okay," yelled Man disappointed, then suddenly laughed out again and yelled to Ing Yen, who had been standing behind Ji Hao, "Old Yen, come on. Take off your cloak. Hurry. Take off your cloak. And hold these eggs for me. They're so delicious." Ing Yen smiled with a sour face, took the golden silk cloak worn by him off, and showed up the tight, short underwear underneath it. Man started joyfully climbing around on the hundreds of feet tall tree, and throwing bird eggs down one after another. Ing Yen rushed up under the tree in a flurry, and agilely caught every single bird egg that came flying down from the sky, after which he put them on his cloak, which had been spread flat in the ground. At the same time, he was screaming towards Man, young master. Young master. Be careful. Slow. Slow. Ah. You almost fell. Ah. Although Ing Yen was screaming like hell, his movements were nimble and quick. He steadily caught all the bird eggs and put them on the cloak, without missing a single one of those bird eggs that had been thrown down by Man like raindrops. Quite often, Ing Yan's hands were leaving light afterimages behind. Ji Hao had triggered the gold crow pupils, but was still unable to see his moves clearly. Ji Hao didn't say anything, but he was badly shocked by Ing Yan. He speculated that Ing Yan's power far surpassed that of Ji Zhua's. It was very likely that the level of his power could be extremely close to that of those legendary Magus kings. However, a powerful man like that was only an old servant in front of Man. He had to grin cheekily and escort Man all day long no matter what she wanted to do, and would even kiss the ground while facing her. It made him wonder what kind of man's abo was. Oi, young master. Look out. We have drawn that huge guy out there. Along a shout that came from tens of miles away, a gust of gale was brought up, which blew across the jungle, breaking large amounts of branches and leaves. Even the rain that was falling from the sky was shaken by the invisible sound wave, transforming into a large cloud of white mist, which descended from the sky and shrouded the entire area within it. On a mountain miles again, tens of guards who had come along with Man were now running down across the sharp mountainside. The guard running in front of the team was carrying a 3-foot-long, furry animal in his hands. The furry little thing had been madly struggling in his hands and letting out sharp yet small calls. Behind them, tens of gigantic trees were uprooted by a horrible power and thrown towards those warriors like javelins along with thunderous, piercing swoosh sounds. Ji Hao clearly saw that in front of those gigantic trees, the air had even turned into white, visible explosive ripples by the terrifying impact force. It was obvious how great the power, with which the trees were thrown, was. Tens of guards were agilely running and leaping across the jungle like apes. The gigantic trees that were flying through the air were inches away from scratching their bodies, after which they shattered against the ground. Huge tree trunks were all shattered into pieces, the ground collapsed and rocks burst out, stirring up countless stones and large amounts of soil. Both the sound and the scene were extremely terrifying. An especially angry roar came from far away. From a long distance, Ji Hao saw an over 100 feet tall giant had leapt high into the air, and swung a tens of feet wide gigantic rock towards those fleeing guards. Followed by a loud bang, the ground under Ji Hao's feet slightly shook. On the mountain afar, an area of the forest, which was tens of miles in radius, had been shattered. The ground was split apart and hollowed into a 10 of miles round, huge crater. The unbelievably great power that had done this was caused by a single, random hit of this muscular, ferocious-looking giant. Ing Yen screamed out once more. Young master, you sent them to provoke the mountain god. In the southern wasteland, amongst the non-human creatures like Ji Hao's friend Stone, Treeman and Heng Luo, one kind of creature was formed by the original energy and power of the earth and the mountains. This kind of creature had been nourished by the natural life force energy and universal power, after which they had formed bodies. After that, they were able to enhance the power, which was similar to the natural power of the mountains. Therefore, every single movement of theirs contained great power that could even shake the earth. This kind of magical creature that existed in the southern wasteland jungle, were called the mountain gods by the people of those primitive clans. Some of those primitive clans even worshipped these mountain gods, just like they worshipped their ancestors' souls. Those mountain gods, who were worshipped by these people, would protect their clans while these people would supply food and other services to the mountain gods. That's nothing but a silly big guy, don't be exaggerating. Man held her head high, smoothed her joints, then suddenly leapt up into the air hundreds of feet from the ground, a gust of wind was blowing by at the moment. Man flew along with the wind, towards the mountain god. After only the span of a few breaths, she had flown 7 to 8 miles away. Old Yen. Do not interfere in this. I haven't exercised my whole body for such a long time. I am even feeling it itching, yelled Man, if you even dare to interfere in this, then I can only go back and practice my punches and kicks on your sons and grandsons. The wrinkled face of Yen seemed so bitter, as if he would nearly cry out. He then stamped his feet against the ground, and yelled at Ji Hao with his teeth gnashing, Go! Go! Follow the young master. If she gets hurt even a little bit, we all will have to die. Hurry! Hurry! Follow her. Do not step in, but neither can you let that stupid huge thing hurt the young master. The tens of Man's guards had tried their best to dodge the horrible attack launched by the mountain god. They were gasping heavily, while avoiding those flying stone fragments and running away from the mountain god at their highest speed. The over 100-foot tall mountain god roared out in rage, dropped the half-shattered rock, then pulled a thousands of feet tall, ancient tree out of the ground with his terrifyingly huge strength. Ho! The mountain god again let out a great roar, swinging the huge tree trunk forwards. A small silhouette flashed through the air. Man had ran up to the mountain god like a gust of piercing wind, let out a shout, then raised her arms, steadily held the tree trunk back. Followed by a thunderous bang, the ground under Man's feet shook violently, then split apart into a tens of feet deep crater, which suddenly was created in the ground. A sphere of fiery cloud appeared under Man's feet. She stood on her fiery cloud, floated up in the air with the huge tree trunk propped up by her arms, then shouted out again in a low voice. She turned her body and grabbed the tree trunk, carried the entire tree up along with the mountain god on the other side of the tree, and smashed both, the tree and the giant, onto the ground. The ground shook for quite a long while after that hit, in which half of the gigantic mountain god's body had been smashed into the ground. He struggled for quite a while, but was still unable to get out. Ji Hao's mouth fell open, while he stared at Man stunned. This kind of strength. This little girl didn't even use any magical power, but had just suppressed this incomparably gigantic and powerful mountain god, purely depending on her physical strength. What kind of physical strength was this? This little girl was even months younger than Ji Hao. Chapter 84, Inhuman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 84. Inhuman. The jungle within tens of miles in radius had been shaking violently and ripping into pieces, and a couple of hills had been shattered in the air. The ground was shaking intensely, hurricanes rushing towards the sky from the ground, completely dispersing a large piece of cumulonimbus, which had the radius of nearly hundreds of miles, and showed the pure blue sky. The bright sunlight that hadn't been seen for over half a month, came now pouring down from the sky, lighting this piece of jungle. Ha! Whoa! Ha! Man laughed and yelled out, like a mad monkey. The long hair had been fluttering loosely behind her head, and the few golden rings that banded her hair were long gone. The small body of hers was darting in the air, fleetingly along with swooshing sounds, leaving shreds of afterimages behind. Then she grabbed the huge arm of the mountain god and madly swung his entire body onto the ground, repeating this over and over again. The mountain god, over 100 feet tall, was roaring in rage. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break loose from the pair of snow-white and tender hands of Man, the little girl less than 5 feet tall. Man suddenly appeared at a certain spot like a phantom, with the gigantic body of the mountain god dragged in her hands. She carried the mountain god up, then smashed him hard on the ground. In the following second, she suddenly disappeared and showed up again tens of miles away, threw hundreds of heavy kicks towards the mountain god and kicked him deep into the ground, then lifted a hill aside and hit towards the mountain god's face with it. Man swooshed through the air like a shooting star. Every single move of hers made even the sky shake, and caused a thunderous boom just like the greatest thunder. Ripples of white, fierce air explosions caused by her tremendous power, hit hard in all directions. Large pieces of wood were hit, broken by the air explosions, tree trunk fragments and branch pieces were sent up high into the sky like a storm, then slowly fell back to the ground tens of miles away. Ji Hao gaped as he held Man's mace. He gazed at the little girl, who had been unbridled in attacking the poor mountain god. Man wasn't using any magical power. Not a single trace of magical power could be sensed coming from her body. She was purely depending on her physical strength, beating this gigantic, powerful mountain god to the point that he was shouting and crying, losing the power of resistance. At worst, this mountain god was as powerful as a senior magus, and must be an extremely powerful being, if he would be standing amongst a group of senior magi, which meant, Man could completely suppress a peak-level senior magi with only her physical strength. Such terrifyingly great strength. I have heard that newborns of the dragon kind have the strength similar to ordinary senior magi. Man's strength can probably compete with the offsprings of the dragon kind. Ji Hao was totally stunned. He wiped the strand of saliva that was hanging on the corner of his mouth, then turned to Ing Yen and asked. Ing Yen touched his own mustache proudly, then said with a low voice, "Our old master had measured her power when she was a newborn kid. Back then, our young master's strength was equal to 10 small dragons together. And our young master is growing more and more powerful. By now, only relying on the strength of her arms, she is able to compete with peak-level senior magi, or even higher." Ji Hao had always been a calm person, but he was still badly shocked by Ing Yan's words. As far as he knew, the dragon kind was the most powerful and strongest kind amongst countless other beings in the entire world. Consequently, young dragons were the most powerful kind amongst all the young ones of the various creatures. However, Man had the physical strength that was as great as 10 young dragons together. This. Even Ji Hao's pupils had expanded by a couple of times. He felt that his head had been filled with thunder and lightning. He was shocked too badly to be able to speak. Ing Yen was even prouder when he saw the stunned face of Ji Hao. He subconsciously puffed his chest out and said, "If I tell you the cost for this, you might also be stunned dumb. The young master's mother comes from a noble family. When our young master was still a fetus, she had started being nourished by all kinds of precious treasures, every single day and night. This is how she has gained this amazing strength." Ha! Man let out a loud laughter that shocked Ji Hao's eardrums too hard, even causing a great pain. She then leapt high into the air, held the mountain god's neck with her arms, screamed out like a wild beast and held the mountain god up, then smashed him hard on the ground once again. A gigantic mountain had ripped apart, a huge rift valley that was too deep to be able to see the bottom of, appeared in the ground. The mountain god opened his mouth and spewed out a mouthful of yellow blood mist. The raging mountain god finally released all of his power. Under his skin, countless yellow spell symbols quickly lit up. Tens of gigantic mountains around the mountain god started shaking intensely and were releasing large amounts of khaki-colored smoke. The smoke condensed into a dragon shape, after which was absorbed by the mountain god's body. The original tens of feet mountain god was roaring in a low voice. His body started quickly expanding while being nourished by the khaki smoke. Within a blink of an eye, the mountain god height had reached about 3,000 feet. Man shouted even louder in excitement when she saw all this. She leapt into the air again and threw a kick towards the mountain god's forehead. "Big guy. Fight harder. Don't be so soft." Along with the crazy laughter of Man, the mountain god let out a great yet muffled roar from his throat, then swung both of his arms forward. In front of his body, a phantom of a magnificent mountain slowly appeared. Man's foot kicked hard on this phantom, which was at least 1,000 feet in radius. Following the kick, a thunderous boom came from deep under the ground. At that moment, the mountain god had connected himself with the earth and the mountains, that had given birth to him and had nourished him. Therefore, the earth and the mountains of the entire area within thousands of miles around had become the sources of his power, and the attack launched on him by Man was also been transferred into the vast ground. Unless man was capable of breaking all of the mountains and splitting the ground for thousands of miles in radius with a single punch, she could never hurt the mountain god even slightly from now on. Beat! 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 Man growled out, while suddenly leaving thousands of pieces of afterimages in the air. The thousands of pieces of afterimages seemed all to contain power, madly hitting towards the mountain god simultaneously. Muffled booms came from the underground one after another, the ground was shaking violently, small cracks continuously appearing on the ground, then quickly closed back up under the nourishment of the khaki smoke. A couple of hills that were just shattered by man's violent power suddenly rose back up from the ground, turning quickly back into their original shape. The mountain god didn't stop growling, his body was shelled by the phantom of the mountain in front of him, his pupils which were filled with cruelty and rage started to shine with a yellow light. Suddenly, he raised his head and let a great shout out towards man. Followed by a loud bang, a 10 feet long, round rock darted out from the mountain god's mouth and hit hard on man's body. This was not an ordinary, nature rock, instead, it was a rock of the god, formed by the power of the earth and the mountains. This piece of rock looked no more than 10 feet in diameter, however, its weight had long surpassed thousands of stones. Additionally, the stone had a magical and great gravity, while it was flying fast across the air, even the light on its path had slightly become twisted. Man hadn't seen this coming, and was hit hard by the rock of God. The armor worn by her suddenly lit up, and her small body was sent flying away, leaving a straight trail behind her, then crashed against a mountain hundreds of miles away. The mountain god growled out again, and pointed his finger at the direction that man had been sent flying. The rock flew even faster towards man, who was deeply sunken into the mountain, along with an ear-piercing swishing sound. This attack was incredibly powerful. The mountain god had gathered the power of the earth and the mountains from thousands of miles around. Even a peak-level senior Magus would be hurt badly by such an attack. Ing Yen screamed out aloud. The elderly man who had always been elegant and polite had just leapt high in a flurry and flew towards man with a long trail of fiery light left behind him. From inside the deep and huge pit on the mountainside that had just opened up by man's body, a bright fiery light suddenly flashed. Afterwards, an unspeakably great power came from the pit and quickly swept across the entire area. The power was so magnificent that it seemed to be coming down from the heaven. After the fiery light had flashed across the jungle, Ji Hao felt that the temperature of the surrounding jungle had been suddenly raised to an amazing degree, then soon dropped back down. The rock of God, which had gathered the power of the earth and the mountains, had silently evaporated into a wisp of smoke. A beam of fiery light darted out from the pit and hit right on the mountain god's chest, broke through his chest and opened up a huge hole. Countless glowing red, blazing spell symbols were quickly spreading near his wound, and soon covered his entire body. The mountain god howled out and started vomiting khaki-color blood, while kneeling down on the ground embarrassedly. A slave mark that was condensed by a sphere of flame, silently appeared between his eyebrows. Obviously, this mountain god had been firmly imprisoned by man with some kind of great and magical power. Within the fiery light, man slowly flew up, with a 3 feet long tablet one held in her hand. Her white and tender face was deadly pale. One tablet means wooden/metal/jade small boards, that could be carried in someone's hands, and had symbols/marks carved on it, normally given by some powerful people and to show the holder had been given some kind of special right/power. In these kind of fantasy novels, these boards usually contain magical power, and normally play the role of a life-saving treasure. Chapter 85, Essence Milk of the Earth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 85. Essence Milk of the Earth. The mountain god, who had a huge hole in his chest, had now kneeled on the ground and was gasping heavily. Just now, the tablet carried in man's hand released a beam of fiery light, broke through the phantom of the magnificent mountain which was condensed by the power of the earth and the mountains, and broke his chest, harming him seriously. Afterwards, the tablet imprisoned the mountain god with some kind of magical and great power and turned him into a slave. At the moment, the sense of power coming from the mountain god's body had become very weak, not even greater than an ordinary junior magus. Without rest for a very long time, and replenishing his own body with the earth and mountains that had given birth to him and had nourished him, he could never regain his huge power. Ji Hao carefully stared at the tablet carried in Man's hand. The quality of the blood-red tablet looked very weird, neither made of gold or jade, however, that tablet had the features of both gold and jade. The tablet was 6-inch wide, 1-inch thick and 3 feet long, seemed exquisitely crafted, and on its surface, countless patterns of flames were embossed. Amongst the flame patterns were all kinds of fiery dragons, phoenixes and other magical, legendary animals which had fire-related powers. These animal embossments were very lively as though they were living creatures. At first glance, these animals seemed to be flying and walking across those swirl-like flame patterns. Ji Hao clearly remembered that when this tablet had released the fiery light, the power that came along with it had made his entire body go stiff, as if he was a tiny ant seeing a god who had descended from the sky and was looking down at the whole world. His mind had gone blank, and he had felt as if he had completely lost control over his own body. That power was so incredibly terrifying that Ji Hao would remember it till the end of his life. However, that magnificent power had only been the aftermath of the power that was released by the tablet. Oi! You! Can't believe that you have just pushed me to use even this life-saving treasure given by my Abba. You're great! Man stood in front of the mountain god, carried the tablet in her hands, swinging it casually and kicking hard on the mountain god's arm that had been supporting his own body against the ground. Do you have any idea about how much time it will need for Abba's tablet to refill its power? It has to be placed under the sun rays for a whole day, in order to refill the power that I just used back there. Now we're in a rainy season. How am I supposed to refill the power for this tablet? Man held the tablet, hitting hard on the mountain god's head, causing huge fire sparks to fly off. Even Ing Yen, who was standing beside Man, opened his mouth when he saw this. Take me to your nest. Big guys like you always have nice stuff in your nests. Man narrowed her eyes and yelled excitedly, if you don't have enough treasures in your nest, you'll be so dead. I'm telling you, my big brother is building a new palace for my Abba, they can really use some labors. The mountain god had shrunk his body to be around 50 feet tall, weakly let a muffled sound out, stood slowly up, touched the huge hole on his chest and then walked with big steps towards the direction that he had come from. While walking, this huge guy often turned his head back and looked at the little ball of fur held in one of the guard's hand. Ji Hao had just noticed that the little furry animal held in the guard's hands looked like a leopard in build, but smaller. The little beast was struggling and howling hard. Ji Hao also found out that the sense of power that was being released from its body had no differences from the sense of the power of the mountain god. Ji Hao thought of what those elder Magus priests, like Ji Kuei, in the Fire Crow clan, had told him. Magical creatures like mountain gods would have accompanying animals sometimes who had the same origin as the magical creature. The prerequisite was that the same power which had given birth to the magical creature and had nourished him, was powerful enough. These accompanying animals held the same meaning to the mountain gods as blood relatives meant to humans, therefore, Man sent guards to sneak into the mountain god's nest and snatch this little animal. This was why the mountain god got so angry, and chased them out, only then was lead to Man beaten so badly by that little girl. Okay, I'll give this back to you, you can have it back, said Man very happily with her eyes narrowed, since you've already became mine, this little thing should be mine too. Haha, hurry, lead the way, let's have a look at your nest. The guard who held the little animal loosened his hand. The little furry thing suddenly transformed into a beam of black light and darted out, quickly climbed onto the mountain god's shoulder, and comfortably hunkered down on his shoulder. After this, a light trace of a smile appeared on the simple and stiff face of the mountain god. He lightly patted the little animal, which was as big as only his finger, and let out a roar towards the sky delightedly. Ji Hao looked at the simple, honest and natural smile on the mountain god's face and smiled as well. Mountain god kinds might have extremely great strength and other magical powers, however, they were nourished by the natural life force energy and power and therefore had the most simple and honest personalities. All of their smiles came indeed from the purest delight deep down in their heart, and were so truly and emotionally appealing. Man wasn't touched at all by the mountain god's simple smile like Ji Hao was. She threw another heavy kick onto the mountain gods but while yelling, "Hurry! Just lead the way. What are you laughing at? Like you dumb things are all like turn from stones, I can never have a good conversation with you. My Abba has tens of thousands of stone. Dumb guys just like you, working for him, they're all as boring as you are." Ji Hao quivered again, subconsciously glanced at Man in shock. Did she just say that the Abba of this little girl had tens of thousands of mountain gods like this, working for him? Even the weakest mountain god was birthed and nourished by the life force energy and power of the earth and the mountains for thousands of miles round. Not only that, to gestate a mountain god also required special environmental conditions, such as an underground cave. Such mature and appropriate environmental conditions could only be coincidentally found at certain, special moments. If man's Abba had tens of thousands of mountain gods working for him, then, how wide would his territory be, to allow him to find all those mountain gods? At least, as far as Ji Hao knew, the direct and indirect territories of the Fire Crow clan were about hundreds of thousands of miles in square. Within this vast territory, there were quite a few stone spirits like his friend Stone. However, the number of mountain gods who could take control of the powers of the earth and mountains within a certain area were probably no more than 5 in total. The mountain god was now gasping heavily, and running in big steps forward. The rest of the people also moved faster and closely followed him. Soon, they had rushed for hundreds of miles, and saw a towering mountain standing in front of them. The mountain god walked past the foot of the mountain and led the rest of people to a cliff. Hoo! Along with a great roar let out by the mountain god, a beam of yellow light flashed across his body. Afterwards, the cliff silently moved. A fissure appeared on the cliff. The mountain god turned his head back and mumbled something, then walked into the dark fissure. Led by Man, the rest of the people also walked into the cliff. When they first walked in, the space inside that fissure was extremely dark, but soon, a dim light could be seen in front of them. They kept moving, and the light gradually grew brighter. Under the light, the cliff walls on each side of the fissure started becoming crystal and smooth, like the best quality jade. Even some rocks were transparent like a real crystal. This magical light was coming out from these crystal rocks. From time to time, natural formed yellow spell symbols would flash through the cliff walls, then quickly disappear. These spell symbols were all in ancient and simple shapes, gathered from the original source of the earth power. Ji Hao instinctively triggered all of his spiritual power, and imprinted all of these occasionally appearing spell symbols, deep in his soul. Ordinary people wouldn't get the chance to see these naturally formed, original spell symbols with their own eyes in their entire lives. They walked along the wide road inside the fissure for tens of miles. Then, the space suddenly became broad and bright and a huge cave with the radius of tens of miles was located inside the mountain. The ground of the cave was formed by fine and smooth soil, which seemed very pure and rich, where an oil-like liquid could even be squeezed out by hand. Countless odd plants and flowers had been growing in the soil. Ji Hao took only one glance at them, then quickly recognized hundreds of rare and powerful herbs that Qing Fu had mentioned. Most of these herbs that were extremely rare in the jungle had been growing all over this cave, some of them even had been growing for thousands of years. Between the roots of these herbs, different-sized precious stones had been piled up on the ground as if they were ordinary stones. Ruby, sapphire, emerald, crystal, all kinds of precious stones were shining with piercing, multi-colored, bright lights, and each of them contained great earthly power. However, what had been most attracting wasn't any of those precious stones, neither were it those rare herbs. instead, it was a pool, with the radius of over 100 feet and located right in the middle of the cave. The pool contained a kind of thick and sticky, khaki liquid. A dense, earthy scent was emitting from the liquid, making Ji Hao feel a very uncomfortable itching in his throat. Ing Yen exclaimed out, "So much essence milk of the earth. How many years does it need to gather a whole pool of it?" Chapter 86, Harden the Body. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 86. Harden the Body. Man thrust her little finger into the pool and dipped a little bit of essence milk of the earth, then put the finger tip into her own mouth and tasted it with her tongue. She instantly spat a few mouthfuls of saliva out, frowningly, after that. "It's not as useful as you said. Old Yen." Man immediately lost interest in the essence milk of the earth, leaping and running towards the hill of precious stones, over 100 feet tall, located quite far away from the pool. That small hill was piled up with uncountable, different-sized and multicolored precious stones, which were shining with a bright, piercing light that could blind even an ordinary man. "To you, our young master, it will certainly be useless, however, to other people, this is a treasure," said Ing Yen. At the same time, he took out a fist-sized jade bottle from his sleeve, and threw it into the pool that contained the essence milk of the earth. The jade bottle suddenly expanded out into a human head size, and released a fierce gust of air stream from the opening. A thumb-thick essence milk of the earth slowly rose from the pool and flew into the opening of the bottle. Ing Yen seemed like he was trying very hard to control the bottle. His facial expression suddenly changed, and his white facial skin had turned blood-red because of overexertion. A buzzing sound came from the bottle. The essence milk of the earth started flying into the jade bottle in a stream while the bottle was shaking intensely. The liquid surface level in the pool started declining. 1 inch, 3 inches, 7 inches. A foot, 3 feet, 7 feet. When the liquid surface level dropped for 16 feet, hundreds of human head-sized yellow crystal showed up in the liquid. These crystals were transparent and shining. Wisps of thumb-thick smoke could be seen coming in and out of them, and circling around them. From time to time, a bright light flashed through these crystals and lit up large pieces of ancient, simple spell symbols on the crystals. Seeing the crystals, Ing Yen waved his hand with an excitement-filled face. Then the jade bottle stopped extracting the essence milk of the earth. Instead, it released tens of streams of air, and started absorbing those crystals. Those human head-sized crystals seemed strangely heavy. Ing Yen pointed at the jade bottle with his forefinger and middle finger. Fire sparks burst out from between his fingers. He seemingly used all of his power to control the jade bottle, and finally, those crystals rose slowly, flying towards the narrow opening of the jade bottle, along with a low buzzing sound. "Ji Hao, you and the guards did a good job by taking care of our young master. You should take these essence milk of the earth. The essence milk of the earth is condensed by the power and life force energy of the earth. It is able to slightly improve your strength, and largely improve the condition of your bodies, and your defensive power. More importantly, it can purify your meridians and Magus acupoints, and bring great benefits for your practice in the future." While Ing Yen was trying his best to control the jade bottle and absorb these crystals, he pointed his fingers at the remaining essence milk of the earth in the pool, which was about 50.6 feet in radius and a feet deep, and said with a calm voice, "But, you have to be extra cautious and careful when you absorb this. Do not absorb the amount that is beyond the capacity of your bodies, otherwise, your body will turn into stone, which will be huge trouble." Ji Hao and the tens of guards glanced at each other, then all jumped into the pool. Those guards were overcautious. They wouldn't dare to lose their politeness in front of Ing Yen and Man. They would only sit in the pool of essence milk of the earth and carefully absorb the liquid with their special methods. But, Ji Hao didn't care that much. He even took off his clothes, leaving only a short underwear that was made of leather, directly laid down on the ground and soaked his entire body into the essence milk of the earth. In the meanwhile, he triggered the Butian Bulu magic spell. Every single pore of his body opened simultaneously, formed countless tiny swirls and started absorbing the essence milk of the earth. The essence milk of the earth had been formed from the essence of the earth that had gathered the power and life force energy of the earth. The essence of the earth was purified by the mysterious universal power. Over a very long time span, the essence of the earth slowly condensed into liquid and gathered in caves that had the perfect environmental conditions. By the perfect environmental conditions, it meant that these kinds of caves were able to gather the natural power and energy, and brewed the earth essence liquid like wine, for at least 10,000 years, after which it finally would become the essence milk. The earth power was highly rich and nourishing, and had always been considered as the mother of all kinds of beings. The essence milk of the earth was formed by the earth power and thus had the magical effect which could largely improve the condition of human bodies. If a southern wastelands warrior would have a chance to improve his body with the essence milk of the earth, normally speaking, after the warrior did that, his or her power would be able to far exceed that of the other peer-level warriors and could probably compete with 3 to 5 warriors, who were in at the same power level, at the same time. A drop of the essence milk of the earth had been inhaled into Ji Hao's body, then quickly transformed into wisps of yellow smoke and was swallowed by the multicolored flame in his lower abdomen. Soon, streams of multicolored lights, which were a lot brighter than the usual, had flown out of the flame and quickly been absorbed by Ji Hao's body. Ji Hao had a strange feeling that previously his body used to have a lot of interspaces between his body cells, but now, those interspaces had started to be filled with an unknown material that had high consistency. However, his body didn't become heavier at all, instead, it became firmer in quality. Ji Hao kept his breath orderly. Every time he breathed, larger amounts of essence milk of the earth were merging with his body. The essence milk of the earth was formed by the essence of the earth, therefore, every single drop of it was incredibly heavy. Even Yin Yen seemed to have spent quite an effort to move those essence milk of the earth into the jade bottle with his power. After absorbing even a single drop of the essence milk of the earth into the body, an ordinary warrior needed to spend large amounts of energy to digest it. He would need to extract the beneficial powers from it and send the powers to each part of the body. After doing so he would have to improve the condition of his body and lay a better base for future practice. However, Ji Hao had the Bu Tian Bulu magic spell, which was an unimaginably powerful special ability. The magical multicolored flame in Ji Hao's lower abdomen only needed a short while to absorb the essence milk of the earth. First, it would neutralize all of the negative power, which would make a human body slowly crystallize, contained in the essence milk. Then, the flame would transform the essence milk into pure power and energy that would be most beneficial to the human body. Ji Hao's muscles had been waving orderly under his skin, like a quiet, peaceful ocean. His breath gradually turned heavy and powerful. From the skin to the flesh, from the meridians to the internal organs, and from the bones to the marrow, even the brain and nerves, which were extremely hard to be purified, his whole body had been quickly improving and strengthening by the multicolored light streams, which had become a lot brighter and thicker than usual. The little group of man's guards, even the few senior magi amongst them, could only carefully intake a few drops of the essence milk of the earth each time, and worked very hard to digest and purify it with their own blood and energy, extract the power from it and averagely send the power to their entire body. Those junior-level guards had to spend the whole 12 hours, which was a half-day, to barely digest a single drop of the essence milk of the earth. As for those senior-level guards, although their blood was pure and powerful, and the power and energy contained in their bodies were as great as a dragon and as vast as an ocean, they still needed the span of one breath to digest one drop of the essence milk of the earth. But with the Bu Tian Bulu magic spell, Ji Hao could digest at least over 100 drops of the essence milk of the earth during the span of one breath. Ji Hao's digesting speed was over 100 times faster than those senior magi. Most of the power that had been extracted from the essence milk of the earth became nutrients for the multicolored flame itself. The originally dim flame had now become more and more brighter, and even doubled in size. Because of his continuous absorption of the power of essence milk of the earth, the multicolored flame's digesting ability had also been improving. The essence milk of the earth could not largely improve the physical strength within a short time span. Instead, what it had been doing was upgrading the condition of Ji Hao's body. Ji Hao observed his own body with his spiritual power. He clearly perceived that after every time he had digested one drop of the essence milk of the earth, his physical strength would only improve by tens of stones. However, the firmness and defensive power of his body would improve by a larger amount. To Ji Hao, who was still in the junior level, the effect of this natural formed treasure, the essence milk of the earth, was unspeakably great. Especially the condition of the meridians and magus acupoints inside his body, which had been improved by many times, and was still continuously improving. He sensed that his meridians had become wider and firmer, and those magus acupoints had become clearer. The power contained in them had become greater as well. Additionally, the capacity of his meridians had also been increasing by many times. Every single drop of the essence milk of the earth that had been digested by Ji Hao had brought him benefits that was equal to what he would have gained by eating a junior level beast. Although Ing Yen took most of the essence milk of the earth, there was certainly more than 1,000,000 drops of it left in the pool, which would be enough for tens, even hundreds of Ji Hao's more to use. Ji Hao laid his head on a piece of yellow crystal, while concentrating on running the Bu Tian Bulu magic spell. This crystal that contained a vast earth power also started to be slowly absorbed by Ji Hao's body. His body was becoming stronger, and even grew 2 inches taller. At the same time, his shoulders grew wider and his muscles swelled greatly. Chapter 87, Madness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 87. Madness. Beside the blue jade lake, was a vast primitive jungle. The raindrops never stopped swishing down from the sky, and the jungle had been quivering in the storm, while the dense mist had been madly rolling and spreading in the jungle. Except for the roars of the wind and the rain, and the brushing sound of the branches and leaves, none of the other sounds could be heard from the jungle. Even the most ferocious beast wouldn't be willing to leave its nest during the rainy season, unless it was starving. Almost all of the beasts and birds had been quietly staying in their nests, enduring the endless rain, day after day. Suddenly, the mist was dispersed by an unknown power. Tens of fully armed Jia clan's warriors rushed across the jungle, without making any noticeable sounds. 2 pairs of eyes were shining on each of these warriors' faces. They seemed like emissaries who had come from the underworld and were sent by death itself, responsible for harvesting lives. Wherever they ran through, all of the animals, no matter if it were the beasts hiding in their tree holes or the birds hunkered in their nests, had all been silently and gently killed by these Ji clan's warriors, with a slight touch. No sound of any living creature could be heard. The jungle they had walked across, gradually became deadly silent. Only the roaring of the storm could be heard, which seemingly ruled the whole world. Behind these Jia clan's warriors, hundreds of gigantic sword-edged spiders had been quietly and quickly moving forward. Each of these sword-edged spiders carried large groups of dark-skinned warriors, who were wearing full leather armor. These great, dark troops hid under the beeches and leaves, silently moving towards man's manor. The hundreds of sword-edged spiders carried at least 10,000 warriors on their backs. Each of these warriors had a cold and cruel expression. Obviously, these were all powerful, elite warriors. From time to time, a dim light would flash across the armors worn by them and the weapons held in their hands. Judging based on the southern wasteland standards, all of their armors and weapons were the best quality magical tools. Behind these sword-edged spiders, 20,000 feet long metal centipedes were rushing across the jungle like a fierce gust of wind. On the backs of those metal centipedes, nearly 1,000 Jia clan warriors had been sitting or standing, with a cold and greedy smile on their faces. They looked through the dense jungle, at the magnificent palace located on the cliff afar, seemingly floating above the clouds. Jiang Yao had been standing on the metal centipede's head that had been rushing in the front. Her face was ferociously twisted like that of a ghost, and her body was slightly trembling. Her eyes were filled with flames that contained a bone-deep hatred. She had been cursing in a low voice with her teeth gnashing. A thumb-sized, black scar could be clearly seen on Jiang Yao's throat. Not long ago, Jiang Yao had gathered tens of clans and set an ambush for Ji Hao, but Ji Hao had set up a counterplot, pretending that his soul had been controlled by the master magus priest of the demon clan with its soul-calling magic, and directly walked up to Jiang Yao, and launched a deadly attack on her. Fortunately, Jiang Yao had her life-saving treasure, given by Jiang Bo, with her, therefore, although she had been badly wounded by Ji Hao, she succeeded in getting away. However, Ji Hao had taken out his thorns of life and death, the inherited magic treasure of Qing Fu, and used the 3 blackthorns, which had been used and nourished by hundreds of Qing Yi clan's magus priests, for over 10,000 years, and had attacked her once again. If she wasn't the daughter of Jiang Bo, the Baifeng clan's master magus priest, who could use all kinds of rare and precious medicine of the Baifeng clan's storage to save Jiang Yao, by now, she would belong dead. Even though Jiang Bo tried his best to cure her, the 3 highly poisonous black thorns had left deep, ugly scars on Jiang Yao's body. Her throat, chest and lower abdomen, where the 3 most important magus acupoints were located, had all been punctured by the 3 thorns of life and death. The poison had spread over her body, which made Jiang Yao, who had just broken into the senior level 2 years ago, fell back to the junior level. Apart from this, her body had been damaged by the poison of the blackthorns, therefore, even amongst junior magi and magus priests, Jiang Yao was now at the bottom level. Her plan had failed, and her body was damaged. If all these facts could still be accepted by Jiang Yao, then Jiang Shui's death really drove her into a desperate situation. Jiang Shui's father was Jiang Shu, an elder of the Baifeng clan, and also one of the important followers of Jiang Bo. He could even be considered as one of Jiang Bo's arms. Jiang Shui was the only child of Jiang Shu. More importantly, she was a highly important tool for Jiang Bo and Jiang Shu to draw Ji Shu closer, and to control Ji Shu, which meant, Jiang Shui was incomparably important for the Baifeng clan to seep into and to control the Fire Crow clan. But, Jiang Shui was killed by Ji Hao. Jiang Yao didn't even know how to explain this to Jiang Bo and Jiang Shu. I want them to die. I want them die. They must die. Jiang Yao growled madly and hoarsely. From the pupils to the white of her eyes, the entire eyeballs of hers had become a weird and a scary blood-red color, shining with a vicious blood-red light. Ji Hao, Ji Xia, Qing Fu, and everyone that is related to them, all of them have to die. All of them have to die. A sizzling sound came from her neck, along with which, a wisp of black smoke rose from the scar on her neck. The poison which hadn't been completely dispersed from her body, was again corroding the tender skin near the wounds. Jiang Yao frowned in pain, and nearly fell down from the metal centipede's back. Di Luo, who had been standing beside Jiang Yao, thrust his arms out and held Jiang Yao. After that, he put his arms around her waist, and never left her body. My respectful magus priestess, your injuries are so serious. What about that Wu Xian magical medicine? Don't you have any more of that? Yelled Di Luo dramatically. At the same time, he put his nose near Jiang Yao's neck, breathing deeply and fascinated. The light aroma emitted from Jiang Yao's body often made Di Luo feel that his mind had been carried away from his body. The primitive land, the magical, vast jungle, and a noble, beautiful magus priestess from a powerful primitive clan, all these were way too attractive to Di Luo. He swore that he was totally obsessed in the breathtakingly charming Jiang Yao. Since Di Sha had left the southern wasteland, now he, Lord Di Luo, was the most powerful man in the Blood Fang. He was certainly capable of doing something for this beautiful magus priestess. But, of course, everything that he was going to do for this beautiful magus priestess had a condition. How could he do anything for free anyway? Noble people like him, from the Yu clan, were unimaginable, honorable and respectable. To work for free. No, such a stupid thing was not what Di Luo was going to do. Lord Di Luo grinned Jiang Yao, while staring at Di Luo with that pair of blood-red eyes, and said, kill Ji Hao, Ji Xia and their families for me, wipe all my enemies out, then, I will accept any of your reasonable demands. Any demand, said Di Luo, he couldn't hide the happiness deep down in his heart. Anything. Yes. Jiang Yao's voice became especially cold and ruthless, for now, I need you to kill every single person inside this manor, right now. I know that you people know some powerful, large-scale magical formations. I want you to arrange the most powerful large-scale magical formation here, around this manor, and use it to capture Ji Hao alive, and kill all of the others. Jiang Yao was born extremely beautiful and attractive. At the moment, she had been shrouded by a cold and ferocious vibe, a looming blood-red light had been circling around her body. In Di Luo's eyes, this woman now looked like a highly poisonous, beautiful flower, and had an irresistible charm that could make any man drown in it. Even the most beautiful, noble lady in our capital doesn't have 1/1,000,000th of your beauty. Di Luo shrugged and signed with a low voice, and said, "Oh, I'm really jealous of that man. Okay, I'm willing to do anything for you that I should seriously consider if I should send a duel request to your husband to put him down in front of your lovely face. Kill Ji Shu." Haha. Jiang Yao chuckled and said with a tone that was filled with madness and viciousness, "If you, Lord Di Luo, can satisfy me this time, I don't mind to offer you a chance like that. To be honest, I'm already starting to lose patience towards that useless man." Di Luo let out a shout excitedly, then waved his hand hard in the air. A large piece of light-gray smoke mixed with the watery mist, and flew into the palace along with the fierce wind. Guards who had been standing outside of the manor's front gate slightly trembled, then suddenly fell down on the ground, while blood was gushing out of their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths. Large groups of Blood Fang's warriors rushed up through the stairs, raised their heavy weapons and ruthlessly chopped towards those poor guards, who lay on the ground paralyzed, being unable to move their bodies. A bone-cracking sound started coming out from the manor, and a dense blood scent slowly spread out. However, once the blood scent came out of the manor, it had been dissipated in the air by the storm. TL note. Am I the only one who failed to picture Jiang Yao as extremely beautiful in my head? She seems always wearing a very twisted face. The best I can do is to picture her as a lizard. EDT. Same. Chapter 88, Make a Run for It. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 88. Make a Run for It. Yin Yen satisfyingly moved all of the earth essence crystals from the essence milk pool into the jade bottle. These extremely hard and heavy crystals were the purest essence of the earth energy, and only a sesame-sized crystal piece of it weighed nearly 1,000,000 stone, not to mention that these crystals had countless magical usages and effects. If magical treasures were made with the earth essence crystals, the finished magic treasures would be especially heavy and incomparably powerful. Only peak level and above senior magi could use that kind of magic treasure freely. Weapons and armors that were forged from ordinary metals would shatter into ashes once being touched by magic treasures made from the earth essence crystals. If you would grind a human head-sized piece of earth essence crystal into powder and blended it with water from the magical spring of heaven and earth, then scattered it into soil, it could turn the soil within 1,000 miles round into extremely fertile, magical land that would become the perfect field to plant all kinds of rare and magical plants, including medicinal herbs and flowers. Nevertheless, the most important usage of the earth essence crystal was to be the core of some specially powerful and magical, large-scale battle formation. For example, Yin Yan's old master liked to set a kind of powerful, terrifying magical formation, called the Flying Preventing Magical Formation, with the earth essence crystals around his own palace. The earth essence crystal contained an extremely powerful, magnetic force like earth power, and after this magical formation had been set up in a certain area, even Magus kings wouldn't be able to fly within that area. Instead they would only be able to walk on the ground step by step. The variety of magical usages had given the earth essence crystal spheres an unimaginably high value which Ji Hao was still unaware of. This time, Yin Yan had taken 90.9% of the essence milk of the earth from that pool, added with so many of the earth essence crystals, this could even compare with all of his property that he had gathered in his life. Therefore, Yin Yan couldn't help but laugh from ear to ear, even the pores on his face seemingly bloomed like flowers. Ji Yao woke up, while laying on the ground and slowly moved his body. Ing Yen didn't notice that one piece of earth essence crystal under Ji Hao's body had completely been absorbed. After Ji Hao digested that human-head-sized earth essence crystal piece, his physical strength had only increased by around 100,000 stones, however, the firmness of his body had improved by 100 times. Ji Hao observed the inside of his own body with his spiritual power. He was very satisfied when he saw that every single vessel, meridian, bone and even internal organ of his, was shining with the special light of the earth essence crystal. Especially those interleaving meridians had expanded over 10 times wider than before, now those meridians felt like rapidly flowing rivers. The inside of those meridians were now completely unblocked, looked as pure and clean as mirrors, and all of parclos and blocks had been swept away by the incomparably powerful earth energy. The tens of man's guards stood up as well, satisfyingly soothing their joints. The rest of the essence milk of the earth had been absorbed by Ji Hao and the tens of guards, without leaving even a single drop. A few senior-level guards had gained great benefits from the essence milk of the earth, their faces were even blushing in delight. The few senior magi kicked and punched each other, and found out that the same attacks that could have harmed their bones before, now only made their bodies slightly shake. Their bodies' conditions had been improved by many times, and could now easily take the attacks that they never could before. Do not stand there laughing for nothing. Since you've all got some benefits from that pool, now carry these precious stones back for me, yelled Man on the other side of the cave, while grabbing a handful of precious stones and threw them towards those guards. Hit by the stones, those guards all howled out in pain. During the time that Ji Hao and the guards were in the pool and were absorbing the essence milk of the earth, Man was commanding the mountain god to pick the largest and most shining precious stones in the cave out, and piled it up into a nearly 50 feet tall hill in the cave. Ruby, emerald, sapphire, diamond, jade, and many other different colored precious stones that Ji Hao couldn't even tell the names of, were piled up in the cave. The 8 lights emitted from the hill of precious stones made it so that people couldn't directly look at it. Man was proudly sitting on top of the hill of precious stones, smilingly swinging her legs. Hurry, carry all these back. All mine. These are all man's, yelled Man while laughing happily, these stones are so colorful. I like them. Pretty. Take them back and inlay them on the walls of my palace, I want to make those girls jealous. After shooting a glance of dislike at Ing Yen, Man then continued, Old Yen. The few granddaughters of yours are so dumb. I must make them jealous enough to die. Ing Yen opened his mouth, looking at Man with a pitiful face, the huge smile on his face was suddenly gone without a trace, instead, he now seemed as if he was going to cry but failed to shed a tear. Those guards hunted a few gigantic beasts from the jungle, skinned them and used their skin to wrap the precious stones that were carefully picked out by Man, into tens of huge packages. Ji Hao and each of the tens of guards carried one package on the shoulder and left the mountain god's nest. Man seemed to be in a very good mood. She was happily walking at the front, holding a very large plantain leaf as an umbrella, and was humming an unknown melody. The mountain god had been following Man around with heavy steps. Man never stopped giving him orders, making him climb a tree and steal bird eggs, or ordering him to take the honeycomb of poisonous bees from some tree holes, and before he was done with that, Man ordered him to lift a large piece of the ground to find lots of eatable, fresh plants' roots. The mountain god had a very simple mind and an inexhaustible strength, therefore, he simply followed all of Man's orders. In the jungle they walked by, almost all dweller-creatures had been disturbed by Man and the mountain god, letting out complaining sounds. Ji Hao looked at Man, who had been leaping around the jungle excitedly, gasped in admiration and said, Man is such a happy girl. Ing Yen had been walking side by side with Ji Hao, he subconsciously let out a bitter smile when he heard Ji Hao's words, then said, yes, she is just too happy, so happy to cause the other young masters great headaches that's why they told her to come to this manor. Ji Hao took a glance of shock at Ing Yen. Ing Yen instantly covered his own mouth with his hand, lightly slapped his own face, lowered his voice and let out a few hollow waves of laughter and said, "Ha, ha, the weather today is really nice." Ji Hao looked up at the gray sky, with a mass of thick, rainy clouds rolling up there. The downpour rain had been swooshing down from the sky, a few floating hills over their heads were now blowing by the fierce hurricane, quickly drifting towards the other side of the jungle, like a few falling leaves. Yeah, such good weather. Ji Hao seriously responded Ing Yen and said, just after 2 more months, when the rain stops and the sun comes back out, we will have fresh, delicious mushrooms to eat. Ing Yen appreciatively nodded towards Ji Hao. This kid really knew how to chat, he must have a great future. Thought Ing Yen. He then said, yes. Not to mention anything else, our southern wasteland jungle can be considered as the most fertile land in the whole world. Boil the freshest red dress mushrooms, along with the newborns of colorful winged sparrow, into a thick soup. That flavor. Can't even describe it, said Ing Yen while licking his own lips. Ji Hao and Ing Yen quickly became a pair of huge fans of delicious food, started discussing all kinds of special foods of the southern wasteland jungle, aloud. Man had been running and jumping all the way, leading Ji Hao, Ing Yen, the mountain god and the tens of guards back to the manor. She jumped onto the mountain god's shoulder, letting the mountain god carry her, and slowly walked up to the stairs. Ji Hao carried a huge package of those precious stones, walked up the stairs as well, while chatting happily with Ing Yen. Soon, they got to the square in front of the manor. Under the arch, Man looked at the surrounding in confusion, and said, these bunch of lazy things, old Yen. Grab them out and whip them good. What? Don't they need to guard in the rainy days? Whip them and teach them how to do their jobs. With me, it's fine, but if Abba had caught them not doing their job as they should have been, their heads would have been chopped off. Ing Yan's face went dark as well. He rolled up his sleeves in anger and walked up to Man. As Man just had said, not a single person had been guarding under the arch. There were tens of guards that ought to be here, but none of them had been doing their job. Ing Yen was clearly aware of how strict the rule of his master was for guards who were absent from their jobs. Even beheading them would be nice treatment. More seriously, this could even drag their entire clan into trouble. Ing Yen frowned, looking at surrounding. He didn't believe that those guards went away by themselves. Suddenly, inside Ji Hao's spiritual space, the white mist quickly gathered inwards. The gigantic figure of the mysterious man then emerged from the sphere of mist afterwards, which the mysterious man shouted out in a resonant voice. Run! Following the mysterious man's voice, Ji Hao let out a great growl as well. Every single hair on his body had stood up, and he suddenly sensed an invisible, extremely ferocious, yet miserable atmosphere that had been surrounding them all this time. Run! Ambush here! Run! Ji Hao shouted out. At the same time, he leapt up into the air, grabbed Man down from the mountain god's shoulder, dragged her and turned around, running down through the stairs. Chapter 89, Blood Moon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 89. Blood Moon. Ji Hao felt like he had been staying in a cozy and warm bed that had a nice sunshine-like scent left on it, but someone had suddenly thrown hundreds of highly poisonous snakes into his bed. An unspeakable cold and wet atmosphere hit directly into Ji Hao's brain along with his spine. Ji Hao opened all his pores simultaneously, drawing the vast natural power surrounding his body. A pair of fiery wings suddenly stretched out behind his body along with a thunderous boom. Ji Hao then rushed down through the stairs at his highest speed. Those guards didn't desert their duties. What really happened was, they had all been killed already. The heavy rain had flushed all of the traces away, without leaving even a stain of blood or a slightest scent of blood, but at the moment before those guards' death, their souls had struggled violently and left an extremely slight, invisible trace near the arch, with the last bit of their power. Reminded by the mysterious man, added with his great and sensitive spiritual power, which was even greater than that of the southern wasteland magi above the senior level, Ji Hao ultimately had sensed the slight trace of cold, subtle vibe, that had lingering around the arch, and was left by the souls of those guards as a message before they had vanished. The mantra Dan with 9 secret words, which was capable of purifying the soul and connecting with the universe, was unimaginably mysterious. Ji Hao triggered the mantra Dan with 9 secret words, with all of his power. His Yuan Dan started rotating fast in his spiritual space, releasing waves of soul power. Soon, Ji Hao's soul power quickly spread towards the surrounding area, like a huge net. He instantly perceived a horrible, homicidal vibe in the air that was so thick that it even nearly condensed into a visible entity. Ji Hao injected all of his power into the fiery wings, fleeing as fast as he could. He held the small body of Man, while leaving large numbers of afterimages behind him. Followed by a loud boom, Ji Hao suddenly darted out like a cannonball. He moved so fast that he even shattered the air, and caused an air explosion. 9 air explosions had then been started by Ji Hao in a row. His body flashed across the air and appeared in the middle part of the stairs. It seemed that in the next moment, Ji Hao could rush down the stairs and flee into the jungle around the lake. Until now, Ing Yen and the tens of guards hadn't even realized what was happening. They were indeed powerful, and had a noble status. They were a group of people that were representing the highest class of the southern wasteland. Normally, no one dared to offend them. Those guards were more like working slaves during most of the time. As for Ing Yen, he came from a good family and was doing an especially important job, staying by Man's side. Ing Yan's status was equal to the Grand Chancellor. He had never fought against any man, and had not even seen real blood for his entire life. Judging on basis of fighting experiences, even if Ing Yen and the tens of the guards combined their experiences together, they wouldn't be able to compete with 10% of Ji Hao's experiences. Ji Hao had already ran nearly 1,000 feet far, when Ing Yen turned his head back in both panic and confusion, opened his mouth and yelled, "Ji Hao, are you stupid or crazy? What are you running from?" Without any preparation, Ing Yen suddenly sensed a light blood scent. An old, bronze tablet tied around his waist, that was embossed with a totem of a 3-headed pheasant, and contained some kind of special magic, suddenly lit up. The 6 pupils of the 3-headed pheasant spurted out streams of bright cyan light, which quickly coiled around Ing Yan's body and wrapped him up. This magical poison. Ing Yen rubbed his own nose and murmured. Green blood started dripping down from his nostrils. At first, the blood was only colored light green. Soon, it turned into a dark green color and then started emitting a blood-like odor. It was a magical poison, but not some ordinary kind of poison. It was the most effective and deadly poison that was made from the most poisonous creatures in the jungle. This kind of poison acted fastest amongst all kinds of magic poisons. Ing Yen wasn't an expert of magical poisons, but after all, he had been living for nearly 1,000 years. His rich experiences allowed him to instantly recognize the scents of venoms from at least 100 different kinds of poisonous creatures. This meant, this magical poison was made from at least 100 different kinds of highly toxic venoms. Mixing the venoms of over 100 different kinds of highly poisonous creatures, and making them into magical poison, in the southern wasteland, such drug-making skills had only been secretly inherited by a few Magus of the big clans like the Baifeng clan and Rosefinch clan. Any other small or middle-scale clans could never have this kind of mysterious and powerful skill, neither did they have enough money nor power. Level to make this kind of magical poison. Facing the magic poison that had attacked suddenly, the bronze tablet tied around Ing Yan's waist automatically activated and tried to protect its owner. The power of the tablet blocked the poison from spreading any further inside Ing Yan's body. However, a slight trace of magical poison had already got into his body, which made him feel extra weak. The poison had weakened his power by around 30%. Which clan did you come from? Are you trying to challenge us? After being attacked by the magical poison, Ing Yen didn't have any other reaction, but only growled towards the air with a hoarse voice, "Do you have any idea that, if you ever offend our young master, what will happen to your entire clan? Do you want your entire clan to die?" Ji Hao held Man tight, while running as fast as he could. He clearly understood that Man could not die. At least, while he was still considered as Man's bodyguard, Man could not die. By following Man around for these couple of days, Ji Hao had learned that once this little girl died while he was around, the entire Fire Crow clan would be cruelly punished by her Abba. Ji Hao used all of his power, trying to run faster. While he was running, he heard that Ing Yen was still yelling at the enemies, who had just sneaked out attacked him. Ji Hao couldn't help but sigh with regret. Whoever that was, they had already killed all of the guards, which meant that they had come with a resolute purpose. If really so, who would be frightened by your threats? Thought Ji Hao. Ji Hao took another step forward and darted again out. His body shape became hazy, and large numbers of afterimages appeared behind him. He had already ran to the last step of the stairs. The sky suddenly darkened, a huge, blood-red moon silhouette appeared in the sky. Thousands of wisps of smoke rushed down from the blood-red moon, transformed into a gigantic net, and shrouded the area within tens of miles around. Ji Hao hit a wisp of blood-red smoke, felt a stream of extremely soft and sticky power coil around his body, which slightly pushed him backwards. This power badly shocked Ji Hao, even making him feel dizzy and unable to see. He staggered back for hundreds of steps while gasping heavily. The power had just pushed him back to the stairs in front of the manor. Moon, blood moon. Ji Hao raised his head, gazed at the huge, blood-red moon in shock. Moon. Man looked at Ji Hao carefully and asked, "What is a moon?" Ji Hao stayed silent. The night sky of the southern wasteland had always been and only been thickly dotted with countless, different-sized stars. Ji Hao somehow saw the moon from pieces of his own, mysterious previous life's memory, but here in the southern wasteland, he had never seen the moon that should have been dominating the night sky. Therefore, to kids like Man, there wasn't such thing as a moon that existed in this world. This was the first time that she had heard moon, the strange pronunciation, and it came from Ji Hao's mouth. Ji Hao stared at the blood-red moon above in the sky. Although this was the first time he saw this thing in this life, he instinctively felt that this thing was called moon. At the same time, he also felt that this blood-red moon, floating above the manor, was not a real moon that really existed over there, but was only a phantom. The hazy blood-red smoke took the place of the watery mist that was caused by the heavy rain, rising from the ground. Within the blood-red smoke, tall, sturdy, and ferocious, ghost-like silhouettes slowly emerged one after another. The Jia clan warriors were standing in the blood-red smoke while laughing viciously in low voices. They were wearing heavy, full armors, except for their faces, every inch of their skins had been covered in heavy, full metal armors. 2 pair of pupils shone on each of these Jia clan's warriors' eyes, as if they were the most ferocious ghosts that had come to the living world straight from hell. Ji Hao took a quick glance, and found out that at least over 1,000 Jia clan's warriors had come out from the surrounding area. For eyes, Ing Yen yelled harshly, "Are you monsters from the Jia clan? How dare you? You had invaded into our southern wasteland and captured our people, you have already committed a death crime. Now, how dare you come and harass our young master? You! Aren't you afraid of death? Look at what we have already done. Now, can you tell us, are we afraid of death or not?" Di Luo laughed scornfully while slowly walking out of the smoke, with a red rose held in his hand. He threw a vicious smile towards Ji Hao, then said unhurriedly with a dramatic tone, "That little girl is very pretty, she must be worth a fortune, huh, don't you think so?" Ing Yen shouted out in rage. Di Luo suddenly pointed his finger at the sky. When he did that, the blood moon flashed in the sky, then a stream of blood-red light darted down from the moon, towards Ing Yen. Ing Yen instantly let a great howl out in pain. In the next moment, a great cloud of blood. Mist burst out from his left arm. The blood. Red light stream chopped his entire left arm off from his body. The blood moon then slightly spun in the sky, another blood. Red light stream flashed through the air. Ing Yan had just grabbed a red jade tablet out from his cloak, and before he had crushed it, the blood. Red light stream sliced his body into two pieces from the middle. Blood splashed everywhere. Ing Yan's internal organs fell on the ground, flowing like streams, even his soul had instantly been shattered by the power of the blood. Red light stream. TL note. Ing Yan died just like this. I just started to like him. Poor man who will / can look after her later on. EDT, DK. Same.